Good morning, everyone. It's great to see everybody out here. Thank you for joining us today at this incredible event venue. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we gather here today on the traditional territory of the signatories to Treaty 7, and also acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta who have a deep connection with this land. I'd also like to thank the Calgary Farmers Market for hosting us at this amazing facility. I'm pleased to be joined by our Premier, Danielle Smith, and Minister of Finance, Nate Horner, here today at the Calgary Farmers Market for this very important announcement. One that I know will make a real difference in the lives of Albertans and their families at a time when they need it most. Without giving anything more away, it is my pleasure to invite the Premier to the podium to do the honors. Premier?
Thank you. Well, thanks, Minister Horner Neudorf. I've got like 4 Nathans, I think, in our caucus. Thanks, Minister Neudorf, and good morning to everyone. I'm so pleased to be here with the President of Treasury Board and Minister of Finance, Nate Horner, as well as Minister of Affordability and Utilities, Nathan Neudorf, to talk about the government's ongoing work to make life better for Albertans. Yesterday, of course, Minister Horner stood up in the legislature and tabled Budget 2025. Which was a tough but realistic budget that promises to meet the challenges Albertans are facing today. A rising cost of living isn't just an Alberta challenge. Families across the country are feeling the pressure as they struggle to keep pace with rising costs. But helping to ease that struggle is most certainly an Alberta priority. In Budget 2025, we're keeping a promise we made 2 years ago to cut taxes for Albertans. And not only that, we're fast-tracking that tax cut from the plan that we laid out just last year. This cut will save individual Alberta taxpayers up to $750 in 2025. Two-income families could see savings of up to $1,500. Taxpayers who earn less than $60,000 will see their personal income taxes fall by 20%. Overall, this personal income tax cut will put more than $1 billion back into the bank accounts of Albertans this year. And that's money better spent on what you need and what you need for your families. It's money to spend on your priorities, to put away for a rainy day, or maybe to spend on local goods and services right here at the Calgary Farmers Market. There are 2 simple reasons for fast-tracking the tax cut. First, Albertans come first, and second, cost pressures have not fully eased, and in the face of U.S. tariffs that would hurt Alberta families, consumers, and job creators, now is the time to put that money back in Albertans' pockets. As we face headwinds from tariff threats that could cause inflation, we felt that we needed to make sure that Albertans had more money in their pockets to support their families, even if that meant having a larger deficit. So let me repeat, Albertans come first. Making sure you keep more of your money on every paycheck is important. Under our deficit rules, we have 3 years to get back into budget balance when we have these kinds of unusual circumstances that put pressure on our budget. And we are already developing strategies for how we will do that in the immediate term, as soon as the tariff threat has passed. With this tax cut, we're lowering the bottom income tax bracket to 8% on the first 60,000 Albertans earn in 2025. And it means more than 2 million Albertans, nearly half of our population, will benefit from that cut. After July 1st, they will see more money on their paychecks. We know that taxes come out of your hard-earned money, so we will continue working to keep taxes low with the lowest corporate taxes in the country, low fuel tax, no sales tax, and now lower personal income tax. I know that this is welcome news for so many people, and it's one of the many ways in which our Alberta government continues to make life better for Albertans. Thank you, and with that I'll hand it over to Finance Minister Nate Horner.
Thank you, Premier, and thank you for being here at the Calgary Farmers Market. It's always great to be in a venue that supports local and helps support Alberta's farmers. And I encourage everyone to take a look at what the vendors have to offer once we're done here. As you heard yesterday, the economic times have certainly become more uncertain. That's particularly true given the economic uncertainties surrounding increased protectionism and proposed tariffs. After expanding about 3% last year, Alberta's real GDP growth is forecast to drop to 1.8% in 2025 and 1.7% in 2026. These are not easy economic times. However, though it might look stormy, Alberta has always met challenges face on and can come out strong. And we do that by continuing to build on the advantages that we have always that have always made Alberta stand out amongst jurisdictions. We build our industries, manage our resources, attract investment, and work hard to bring forth a responsible budget that works on behalf of Albertans, even during the tough times. And we always keep our taxes low, which is what brings us together today. With low personal and corporate income taxes, low fuel tax, and no sales tax, Albertans generally pay lower overall taxes than those in other provinces. In fact, in 25-26, Albertans and Alberta businesses would pay at least $20.1 billion less in taxes than they would if Alberta had the same tax system as any other province. Now we're adding to that low tax environment by cutting personal income taxes with a new 8% bracket on the first $60,000 of income. As the Premier mentioned, this cut will put more than $1 billion back into the bank accounts of Albertans in 2025, and that is good news for this province. I want to thank you again for being here today as we highlight this new bit of tax relief for people. We know the economic road ahead is likely to be a bit bumpy, but we will continue to focus on what makes Alberta successful, and today's announcement is part of that focus. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Minister Neudorf.
You got one of the ministers with the briefest comments. Even his speech yesterday, our colleagues were thankful that was only about 20 minutes. Thank you, Minister Horner. As my colleagues have said, this announcement is about putting Albertans first. And the changes to the personal income taxes announced today will further cement our commitment to making life more affordable. Keeping more of your own money means you can decide where that money goes and how it's spent, so that you can make the best financial decisions to support yourself and your family's unique needs. And that's exactly what this announcement does. As Minister for Affordability and Utilities, I can't think of a single action that will have more immediate and far-reaching impact for the affordability of this province. With this change, we are delivering effective long-term solutions that not only help with the cost of living, but also improve the lives of people across our great province. Thank you, and I will now turn that over to the Press Secretary to do the Q&A. Sam Blackett can take it from here.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Premier. We'll go into our media Q&A now. We'll start off here in the room before making our way to the phones. Per usual, we'll be going with one question, one follow-up, and we'll start off with our first at the mic.
Hello, Premier, Ministers. Nate. Jason Marksoff with CBC Calgary. This week, former Infrastructure Minister Peter Guthrie told one writer, "I can't sit around a table where a cabinet feels it's fine that dishonesty and conflict of interest is a normal course of business. I don't want to be a part of that." So to the Premier and to both ministers, how comfortable are you with the level of dishonesty and conflict of interest that's been alleged with regard to the AHS situation?
Well, we had a really robust and frank conversation at caucus, and you saw that the former minister is still sitting with our caucus. There are clearly allegations that are very concerning to all of us, and we have to get to the bottom of them. And so that's what we're going to do. We have set up a portal so that all the documents can be shared directly with the Auditor General. And I understand that the former acting Deputy Minister of Executive Council is going to be announcing next week an external reviewer so that we can get to the bottom of it two different ways. So we want to know if there was something that went wrong with the AHS procurement process. We don't want to know what it is, and we want to be able to fix it.
You keep talking about this as though it's simply about procurement. Mm-hmm. There are allegations of conflict of interest, allegations of government interference. Can you speak to those concerns raised by the former CEO and now one of the people who was sitting in your cabinet?
Well, there's a number of different proponents that are behind all of these different surgical centers. And so, I mean, it's a pretty vast level of incompetence at AHS if every single one of these contracts has a problem with it. I mean, I would note with great interest that one contract was signed for $3,731, which is the lowest. And so is that the model that we should be looking at, or should we be looking at the ones that were signed a little bit later? So I guess that's what I'm curious about is there some systemic problem within the department and the staff that they had hired to negotiate these contracts? We need to know that, because we had told AHS back in November 2023, when we did the refocusing, that they were foundationally in a conflict of interest, that we were just not going to allow them to continue to contract to their competitors. And I note that these allegations came up just as we were transferring that function over. So I think it's pretty clear that there are those in AHS senior management who don't like charter surgical centers and are doing everything they can to hold them up. And I think to create some impression that there's been some wrongdoing. There has been actual wrongdoing, we'll get to the bottom of it. But we also need to understand if this is really just foot dragging to prevent us from being able to implement our agenda, which is to use charter surgical centers to reduce waiting lists for patients, which should be everybody's goal.
Your government hired Athana Mentzelopoulos, and she was executing a lot of the restructuring. You brought her in at that time. Are you telling the public, are you telling people here, are you telling us that you believe that she was just this AHS long-time crony standing in the way of what the government wanted?
And Jason, again, just we're going with one question, one follow-up.
That's fine. I'll answer that.
I'm not as good a counter as
that's
some
fine.
people are.
I'll answer
Sorry.
that. I think you're friends with her, so maybe you can ask her yourself. I won't presume to speak for the former CEO, but what I will say is that there will be a very robust statement of defense that the minister will be filing on our behalf. And we ended that contract because we needed some new leadership going in the new direction. The new leadership going in the new direction has to be satisfied that the job, waking up every single day, is figuring out how to improve performance at the 100+ facilities run by Alberta Health Services, not figuring out how to shut down everybody else. So that will be the new leadership that we have at Alberta Health Services, and I'm looking forward to seeing continuous performance improvement across all of the facilities that they run on our behalf.
Thank you. We'll go to our next to the mic.
Sean Polzer, Western Standard. This question's for the Finance Minister, Mr. Horner. Just walking through these resource price estimates, $68 a barrel for oil. Just wondering if you could kind of walk through some of the price sensitivities. 68 is probably the lowest since the pandemic. How much tariffs are going to have an impact on it, and where do you see the direction of energy exports in the industry going forward?
Sure, a lot there. I'll start at the top. Our sensitivities, as outlined in Budget 25, are even more dramatic than Budget 24. That's mostly due to more oil sands production being in post-payout or in a mature royalty status. So now, for every dollar change in WTI, it's a $750 million change to the government's revenue. For every dollar change in the differential, it's $740 million. For every cent change in the currency, it's $560 million. So even more dramatic. We have WTI forecast at $68 for the fiscal year. There's a little distinction, industry forecasts on the calendar year, but we do the fiscal year, so there's an adjustment that has to be made. But that's about $1 below the industry average, which is important to me. I think we want to have conservative forecasting, leave some upside. We want it to be credible, but we want to leave some potential upside for the province. Production, I think we hit the last quarter, we hit 4.3 million barrels a day. We're expecting production to remain strong. The tariffs will and could impact us in a very dramatic way, as you saw in the budget scenarios. So our base case, what we have the budget built on, is a 15% tariff across the board with a 10% tariff on oil. I really got into that yesterday, how we came to that. A little bit more of an art than a science, trying to use publicly available information, what we were hearing from the administration. But we had to acknowledge it some way in the budget. I don't think it would have been credible to use a 25% scenario or zero, frankly. So we think it acknowledges that risk Maybe they come on at 25% for a few months. Maybe they come off and back to zero. So it kind of represents what could be an average over the course of the year. But it changes dramatically. This $5.2 billion deficit would have been in the range of 2.8, 2.9 without the tariff calculation. And if you take the worst case scenario, the high tariff scenario, I think it deteriorates the revenue line by another $3.5 billion. And that's where you were seeing the number of 8.7, the 3.5 plus the 5.2. So did that cover it? You asked a lot there.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And in terms of the tax cut, I heard Nancy on the radio this morning saying it amounts to about $2 a day. Would it have been maybe more meaningful to cut, say, the gas tax? I know we've been talking about it when it was off before, and maybe that would have more of an impact on everyday people and also contribute to economic growth.
Well, this is about $1.2 billion total. That's the value of the tax cut. It'll reach 2 million Albertans. Probably the easiest way to make sure it's spread out fairly as much as possible. The fuel tax brings in a similar amount, actually, but that's, long-standing. I think Albertans know that, notionally it goes towards transportation infrastructure and maintenance. I guess I'd say that I always intended to bring in the tax cut. The Premier and I have definitely had some heated conversations over my time in this chair. And my concern was we didn't peg the population growth number perfectly. It was over our estimates. 4.4% population growth is extremely dramatic. It's unheard of. So I wanted to let that settle so that we could catch up on the revenue side. It takes people a while to get tethered to the job market, and so that we can see the tax revenues come in. So we're not quite there yet, but I do fully endorse bringing it in now for the reasons the Premier said. We have this tariff uncertainty. The province will rebound. I'm sure we'll come out the other end of this stronger than ever. But we are fearful for Alberta households. Not everyone will be that lucky. So we think it's timely.
And we'll go to our next at the mic.
Matt Skis, Canadian Press. This one's for the Premier. Thanks for taking our questions. There's a section here about the Real Property Governance Act and changes to that about effectively permit property owned by health entities to be transferred to Alberta infrastructure on April 1st. Can you talk a bit more about this plan? Is this a plan to sell hospitals to private entities, private corporations? Just a bit more details about that.
One of the things that we found very frustrating when I got in was that we spend billions of dollars building capital projects, and then we spend billions of dollars maintaining and upgrading capital projects. And then if any of those projects need to become available for other use, we're told by the entity, you got to buy it from us at fair market value. And there were several irritations that emerged as a result of that. And so we made a decision as a government. If Alberta taxpayers are going to pay, Alberta taxpayers are going to own it. And so that's why with our new $8.6 billion spend on schools, we are going to continue owning those and leasing them back at $1 to the school boards. And with all of our health facilities, I believe there's 300 different titles, 700 different facilities that will be owned by the government of Alberta. And then that will allow for us to choose the operator, and it will allow us to repurpose them to our needs. We know that we have a lot of changing needs in healthcare. Some are, we have a lot of acute care beds. We've got acute care beds that are filled with those who are alternative level of care patients. We know we need to build mental health facilities, addiction treatment facilities, convalescence facilities, facilities special purpose built for complex needs patients, including the homeless, as well as long-term care facilities. And so allowing us to have line of sight on all of that real estate will allow us to repurpose that. But the intention is for those buildings to be owned by the people of Alberta through the government of Alberta.
Thank you. Off topic here, and this might seem like a minor issue, but there's been a public response to Wayne Gretzky. And I'm wondering what you make of, it seems to have struck a nerve with his apparent support for President Trump and lack to stand up to the 51st State comments. Just what do you make of the public conversation over that right now?
The great one. My family, I always had to admit, even though I spent most of my life in Calgary, we were an Oilers family growing up. So I love the great one. And I think it's unfortunate. I think people expected that rather than wearing a suit, which I think he looked perfectly fine in, that he should have worn a Canadian jersey. I think Bobby Orr has stood up in defense of him. I mean, let's remember Wayne for the incredible legacy and pride that he brought to the Edmonton Oilers. I think that sometimes the social media sphere can get a little bit mean, but I don't think it detracts from his legacy at all.
Thanks, Matt. And we'll take one more from the mic in the room. We're going to take a couple from the phones before we come back. Go ahead, Adam.
Hi, Premier.
Hi.
Just a question of curiosity based on the legislation around deficits here in Alberta. Would it have been possible for this government to run a deficit in this budget without this tax break that's coming for Albertans?
Well, I'll leave the mechanics of how it works to the minister, but I have told the public, and this is the reticence we had last year for the tax break, was that we needed $74 barrel of oil in order for us to be able to balance the budget. It's come down a little bit. We can balance at a lower rate than that, and with the differential being what it is. But we have to plan for the worst case scenario in this. The worst case scenario, we hope, is $68 WTI, and I believe we're anticipating a $17 differential when it comes to Western Canada Select. Because if tariffs do come in on our heavy oil, we anticipate it will cause that differential to widen. So this is the worst case scenario budget. And of course, if oil trends higher, the differential narrows, that it is the case that the U.S. president is interested in getting more Alberta oil and advancing more projects, then that'll be an upside for us to have. But we also have to be prepared that the way we wrote our legislation was to be able to accommodate these kind of unexpected downturns in our revenues. That also being said, I'm glad I've got both of these ministers here. We started a process last year, and it's going to be a continual process. It's our productivity review cabinet committee, where after the budget is over, we convene and we go through and we look at line by line and program by program, every program that we have, to see if we can cut wasteful spending and cut redundancies. And so once we get through the estimates process, I'm going to reconvene that committee, and we're going to have to sharpen our pencils and dig deeper on that, because my twin objective is to have the lowest tax environment in the country, but also to continue running balanced and surplus budgets. So I'll turn it over to Minister Horner so he can elaborate a little bit more.
The answer to the question of would we be allowed with our legislation, certainly. What the legislation requires is basically a $1 billion drop in revenue. We were at 74 last year. We're at 68 this year. You know, there's over $3 billion potentially there. You do have to take in the other sensitivities to fully see the full picture, but more than enough. I guess I would just comment, the legislation also clearly says you have 3 years from the time you post it to provide the path back, and that's the task we have now and the one I'll be focused on. And maybe just one more thing, sorry to keep throwing in here. The big change, like when we show those scenario changes, the big change on the tariff side is on the tax revenue. You know, on the oil side, it will be resilient. Those different levers, the differential, the dollar, will absorb some of that differently, but the tax revenue decreases dramatically.
And just my follow-up for you, Premier. What's maybe the message for Calgarians here specifically? Obviously, that education property tax rate, it's higher here. Calgarians will be paying typically $239 more on top of their already implemented property tax increase coming later this year. I'm curious just what your message is to Calgarians as you tout the tax break.
In the last few years, with the number of people coming into the province, we've had, I believe, 220,000 additional students who have arrived here, and most of them are settling in Calgary and Edmonton. The education portion of the property tax historically had been used to help with capital projects, and I would say to Calgarians that they are going to get the vast number of new capital projects. I know that both school boards I think they have the largest asks in the province. Edmonton's going to experience the same thing. But we've got to build out 100 new schools over the next 6 or 7 years, and being able to have a little bit of support from the communities that are going to be the greatest beneficiaries of that new construction is part of what we had in mind.
Thank you. And we're going to take a couple questions from the phones now. Operator, could you put through our first caller, please?
This was the same debate that my minister and I had last year. And you have to remember it's the same debate that Minister Neudorf and I, or his predecessor in the affordability and utilities would have had the year before, is that when people are hurting because they've got higher prices, affordability issues, we've got inflation, you have to figure out what is the best way to be able to support them. When we first made a decision to support Albertans, we did it through a $100 per month transfer over 6 months. Prior to that, we did rebates on electricity and price guarantees on natural gas bills. We also had looked at the reprieve on the fuel tax when gas prices were up, I believe, to about $1.90 per liter. So we've seen a few things have happened. So the gas prices have come down, because when oil prices come down, so does gasoline. So we think that that's one way in which relief has been delivered. Minister Neudorf's done an amazing job of addressing many of the problems and pressure points that were hitting our ratepayers. With now the rate of last resort is down to 1/3 of what it was 2 years ago, making sure that we don't have excessive charges on local access fees. That's also coming through. I have a little bit more work to do on distribution charges, but I feel like the work that we've done on electricity has also brought costs down. And the and direct transfers don't always hit everybody fairly. What I like about being able to accelerate our promise on personal income tax is we already have a very generous basic personal exemption. So people are able to earn just over $20,000 before they pay personal income taxes provincially. And then when they do start paying taxes, it's now going to be at a lower rate, 8%. And so in my view, it targets the support to those at the lower end of the income scale the most, and those are the folks who are going to be most impacted when we see inflation as a result of tariffs. So that's part of it, is that we're dealing with a tariff crisis. We know it's very likely, if it's implemented and we get into a trade war, it's going to put consumers in the crosshairs, and we wanted to be able to give them some dollars to be able to manage that increase.
Just as a follow-up question, how long is it going to take to get back to a balanced budget, and how are you going to do it?
Well, you know, if markets cooperate and we end up with an agreement with our neighbor in the south, and we're able to build out more oil and gas projects, which he seems to be indicating he's interested in, and we're able to build out more oil and gas projects east and west, and we're able to realize some of the 10,000 megawatts of AI data centers that Minister Neudorf keeps hearing want to set up in our province very quickly. There's a lot of ifs there, but that's what we had to build in. When we build a budget, we have to think of the worst case scenario. And so if it turns out that oil averages more than $70 and the differential stays as narrow as $12 or $13, and we have the ability to do some quick changes to increase the capacity and the amount of production we're able to produce, and we get a couple of these new data centers on stream and all the construction associated with that very quickly. But in any case, it's going to be 3 years that we have to under our legislation. The other part, of course, is We're watching some of the actions that are being taken in other jurisdictions to do line-by-line reviews of all government spending, and we want to make sure we don't have any wasteful spending as well. We think that there are some new tools available to do that kind of financial analysis through AI, and that's going to be part of our process next year. As my Productivity Review Cabinet Committee gets together, we'll be doing those deep line-by-line reviews, cutting wasteful and redundant spending, and hopefully be able to have some good news at the quarterly updates or next year that we're making big progress towards it.
Thank you. And we have time for a couple more questions. We're going to take one more from the phones, and then we have another question here in the room. Operator, can you put through our next caller, please?
The next question is from Emmanuel French from Radio Canada. Please go ahead. Hi, Premier. You said that this tax cut targets and helps people who are lower income. But that's not necessarily true. Like if you earn $30K a year, you get about $150 tax cut. If you earn 60, 100, 200K a year, then you get to 760. So if you're so focused on affordability and you're framing these tax cuts and affordability measures, why not help the people who have a hard time paying for groceries and necessities? Why don't you structure the tax cut this way so that the rich get more money back than the poor?
Well, you get the full tax cut if you make $60,000, which is actually at the lower end of the middle income category. And that's the most that you get is $750 per person, and it would be $1,500 per couple. So I guess I would just differ with your assessment. I really do think that those who are $60,000 and below, who may spend more of their disposable income on the necessities of life, are going to be the ones who get the greatest benefit of this. There are other ways that we can support those who don't pay taxes at all. We have our Alberta Seniors Benefit, we do have AISH payments, we do have bus passes and food banks and other things that we have subsidized over the years. We've brought electricity prices down. We have some of the lowest fuel prices in the country. So there's lots of ways that we can also target support. We've got rental support payments that we pay to those who are non-taxpayers. But a tax cut by definition, you have to be paying taxes in order to benefit from it. And so the taxpayers who are on the rolls under 60,000, I think are going to get a very great benefit as well.
And do you have a follow-up, Manuel?
Yep. So there's this tax cut on one side, but on the other hand, you're also increasing the education property taxes. It differs depending on the house value and where you live, but let's say you live in Calgary. Then you get a full tax cut, you get $750 back. But then the property taxes go up by $250. A third of that tax cut has just vanished. So what do you say to people who say that you're giving money on one side but taking more on the other side?
I would say that when you get services in your community, then those are you have to pay a portion to get those services. And Calgary and Edmonton are going to be the two communities that get the bulk of the $8.6 billion worth of school spending that we're going to do in order to be able to accommodate the number of students who come here and do tend to settle in Calgary and Edmonton. So we, on the advice of our education minister, with the additional pressure that is coming to make sure that we can build those schools in a timely way. It was his recommendation that we increase the percentage that we get from property tax to cover a larger portion of the education budget. I think it was 30% of the budget that was covered by the education property tax before. It's notched up a couple of percentage points. But the lion's share of educating kids, building schools, and paying for the operational funding comes out of general revenues. There's just this small portion that traditionally has always been related to the amount of capital construction that is now going to be adjusted in order to help us with our $8.6 billion build.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question. We're going to come back here to the room. We'll go to the one at the mic.
Hi there, Michael King, Global News. In a similar vein, how far did the conversations go in terms of raising the bottom tax exemption there to try and give a little bit more wiggle room for those making kind of in that $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 range?
I think our basic personal exemption is very generous. I think if you look at the low income cutoff for a typical single household. It's in about that ballpark, and that's kind of what our thinking is if you're in the low income cutoff, you probably need to have all of those dollars in order to be able to spend them on your necessities. In fact, we'd kind of like to see the federal government match us. Remember, if you're I think they start charging taxes somewhere around $12,000 on personal income, so they still pay a federal income tax. We've just taken a bit of a different approach in our province, and always have, by making sure that we at least have a generous tax breaks at the front end, so that people can spend it more on necessities. I think other provinces need to catch up with us.
And just kind of process question in terms of the regulations for getting back to a balanced budget within 3 years, now that this clock is kind of being reset, does this then handcuff the province in terms of projects or funding years down the road to try and get back to that balanced budget?
Well, I hope not. I mean, the capital investment we have to keep on doing, and the minister can talk about that, is the operational spending that we have to get a handle on. And so there's going to have to be some recalibration. And I'll be frank with you, we spent a lot of money on different corporate supports to be able to attract business investment back. And it's worked. But now it's working really well. And we have to kind of ask the question, do we still need to have some of those corporate grants? Or should for-profit companies at some point be able to stand on their own 2 feet? That's one of the questions we're having this year. We'll also be looking at ways in which we've made life, we can make life easier for all of our grant recipients. This is a project we're going through right now that we hear from our grant recipients. They're spending way too much money on hiring people who are applying for grants and then having to do all of the work in reporting back to us. Can we streamline that process so that those dollars can be stretched further rather than on administration? So that is really difficult work that needs to be done, but it's work that we're going to have to start doing. I think we need to end redundant spending, end wasteful spending, and spending that may no longer be necessary with the passage of time, because I think Albertans want to get back to balanced budgets too. Did you have more you wanted to say on that?
Yeah, I can add a little. On the basic personal exemption piece, I would maybe just add highest in the country and growing by another 2% this year. I don't think that's a place we want to get too far ahead of anybody. I agree with the Premier. I think we should let the other provinces catch up in that regard. With the fiscal rules, you have 3 budgets to get back to balance. And I think I would remind people the beauty of the rules. You know, I think when people talk about the royalty roller coaster, in my mind, it's not necessarily the price of oil and the revenue. It's the spending that follows. And, you know, it tracks that way. You cut in the bad years, and then you spend massively in the great years, right? So the fiscal rules, by having the 3 years, it gives us the time, you know, to not be so reactionary. You know, be thoughtful in how we attack this, and you can do that because on the other side of the coin, the rules make you spend the cash surplus appropriately. So, you know, last year, for example, the Premier talked about how things can change. You know, tabled a balanced budget, albeit just barely, $336 million, and it's going to end up being close to a $6 billion surplus. That puts us in a place where we can there's another month left, you know, things can change, but put us in a place where we can invest in the Heritage Fund, actually pay down debt. So I just say that can definitely change, but I think the beauty of the rules is it gives you some time to approach things thoughtfully. I do think the province, you know, going forward, if you're going to have broad-based affordability, if we're going to be a low-tax environment, which I think we all want to be, there's other things that we will need to look at down the road. I think you will need instances where you seek cost recovery in different ways, mostly in places where people have a choice. You know, they're making a choice to use a service that not everyone is. So I think that's going to be important. But as the Premier said, the work has been ongoing, and we'll pick it up again here after estimates. And I think really need to be thoughtful about our spending priorities while we're dealing with this amazing growing population.
Thank you, Ministers. Thank you, Premier. That's all the time we have for questions. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.